Now let's talk about the pancreas. The pancreas has both exocrine and endocrine functions. We talked about the pancreas when we talked about the endocrine system, and we talked about how it secretes both insulin and glucagon along with other endocrine hormones, but those are the two major ones, and they control blood glucose levels. But it also has exocrine function, so it secretes a lot of chemicals known together as your pancreatic juice that is released into the duodenum of the small intestines. So the exocrine functions occur in the acinar cells. These are simple cuboidal epithelium, and they release lots of different chemicals. A majority is going to be water and bicarbonate, which is going to increase the alkalinity of the small intestines, which is needed because the chyme that is entering the duodenum is extremely acidic. So I told you that water and bicarbonate make up the majority of your pancreatic juice, but you also have multiple enzymes. So we have amylase, which digests starch. Remember, starch digestion starts in the mouth. We have pancreatic lipase, which helps in digestion of fats. So this is where the majority of fat digestion actually occurs, is in the small intestines. We have enzymes that get activated, known as proteases, and these are going to get activated in the small intestines, and they're going to break down proteins, which protein digestion started in the stomach. And then we have nucleases that digest nucleic acids. This starts in the small intestines. The cholecystokinin produced from the small intestines is going to stimulate the gallbladder to release bile from the liver, and it's going to stimulate the release of pancreatic juice from the pancreas. And these are going to flow together into the duodenum of the small intestines through a structure known as the hepatopancreatic ampulla. And so this all flows into the small intestines right around the same time, or at the same time as that chyme is entering the small intestines. So this will inhibit stomach motility and slow gastric activity. So now we have all these chemicals from the pancreas, from the liver, moving into the small intestines, and that's going to allow the small intestines to start breaking down and absorbing the nutrients. Secretin from the small intestines stimulates the release of the alkaline bicarbonate, and this helps to neutralize the acidic chyme. And then as the materials move from the small intestines, they're going to enter into the large intestines. And they're going to enter through a structure called the ileocecal sphincter or ileocecal duct. And so this first part of the large intestines is known as the cecum. Off the cecum hangs this tiny little structure called the vermiform appendix. And then we have the colon is the second portion. The colon is broken into multiple parts. So we have an ascending, a transverse, we have a descending, and a sigmoid colon. Then we move into the rectum and then the anus. So the cecum is the first portion of the large intestines, and so the material that has not been absorbed from the small intestines enters the large intestines. And so we're going to move material from the small intestines, the ileum, through the ileocecal sphincter into the cecum. And then hanging off of that cecum is a tiny little structure called the vermiform appendix. This is often thought of as a lymphatic structure. Basically, it has a lot of lymphatic tissue there. It has lymphocytes, and it also houses a lot of the bacteria that live in our intestines. From the cecum, we move into the colon. So the colon is kind of like a frame for the small intestines. And I just talked about them, the ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid colon. From here, we move into the rectum, which is like a holding chamber until we release the material. This last portion is the anal canal, and we have an internal anal sphincter up here that is composed of smooth muscle that will release when the defecation reflex occurs. And then down below, we have an external anal sphincter that we control, and we typically gain control anywhere between 2 and 4 years of age. So the large intestines also has its own mucosal line, simple columnar epithelium. They have a lot of goblet cells that produce tons of mucus. This mucus is going to allow for the movement of material along the length of the large intestine. Large intestine is larger in diameter, but it's actually shorter in length. Okay. The large intestine does not have the villi, so there's not as much absorption occurring in the large intestines. Instead, we absorb the majority of the water that is remaining, and we absorb some vitamins in the large intestines. But the majority of the material in the large intestines is that didn't get absorbed in the small intestines is going to be removed via defecation. There we go. We have our own microbial flora in the large intestines. These break down any carbohydrates, proteins, or lipids that are remaining in the chyme. And as they break down this material, they release waste products or byproducts of the breakdown. A lot of these byproducts of the breakdown are actually what is released from our body in the form of gas or farting. And sometimes, depending on what you're eating, that gas is going to be smelly. Other times, it's not going to have any smell. So typically, if you're eating foods that are rich in protein and fat, you're going to have more of a smelly gas. If it's rich in vegetables, it's going to be a louder gas, but it usually is less smelly. Large intestines also is an area where some of those bacteria help in producing or absorbing certain vitamins. So motility. The large intestines doesn't use the peristaltic waves. So instead, we have regions of the large intestines known as haustra. And these haustra, they move materials kind of like in segmentation. They're going to move materials from one section to the next section in a very slow, relaxed movement. And then a couple times a day, we have a faster movement known as mass movements, where the material moves very rapidly from the large, from whatever region of the large intestine they're in to the next region. And this is called the mass movement. Usually this occurs after a large meal. Or after a meal, I won't say large, but after eating. So depending on the amount of meals you eat, afterwards, within an hour or so, typically that's when you're going to feel the urge to release your bowels. And then the gastrocolic reflex is what stimulates your mass movements. So you eat food, stomach distends, you get food in your stomach, and that stimulates the mass movements, because you can't have food entering the small intestines without getting rid of food from the large intestines, because everything keeps moving through. So the defecation reflex then occurs when the rectum gets filled. So once you have fecal matter in the rectum, that's the waste product, as well as bacteria, then that's going to stimulate the defecation reflex, and the internal anal sphincter will relax, allowing you to then open your own external anal sphincter and push the material out. And again, I said this is typically learned between the ages of 2 and 4, so average age is about 3 years of age. There are some disorders associated with your lower GI tract that I haven't talked about, and with the large intestines I should really focus on. One is called appendicitis, and so this is inflammation of the appendix. Most of the time this occurs when fecal matter gets into the appendix, kind of gets obstructs the appendix, so the appendix then starts to swell, and bacteria that are there start growing, and this causes an inflammation and a pain, and the treatment is to remove the appendix. If it bursts before it is removed, that can lead to peritonitis, which is very dangerous and can actually cause death if not treated. So this picture here shows some of those non-essential organs that we that are associated with our digestive system. So the gallbladder is not an essential organ. The appendix is really not an essential organ. Our tonsils, they don't do a lot for the digestive. I mean, they don't really do a lot in the process of digestion. They are important in protecting us. Our teeth, though they help us in chewing food, they're not that essential. Oh, sorry. Okay. Another disorder associated with our large intestines is the production of polyps. So as we get older, we are more likely to produce polyps. Polyps are just outgrowths of the mucosal membrane, and most of the time they are non-cancerous, but sometimes they can be cancerous. The likelihood of getting polyps our age, so as we get older, we're more likely to get polyps. If we don't eat a healthy diet with a lot of fiber, if we have family history of polyp formation, these are all going to influence our production of polyps. And a lot of times we find these, if we don't have a colonoscopy, we find them because we start bleeding from the rectum. And that can be very scary. So typically once you hit age 50, you're supposed to have a colonoscopy every few years. And that will help the doctors to make sure that you are healthy and that your colon is healthy. Because sometimes these polyps can be cancerous. And again, even a cancerous polyp can be removed relatively easy if you are having it removed quickly. But if you have polyp formation, that can actually obstruct the ability to defecate and can cause a lot of problems. So a single polyp may not cause a lot of problems if it's small, but a large polyp or a mass of polyps can cause a lot of problems. Another disorder is known as diverticulosis. So in the large intestines, these tiny bulges in the abdominal lining will start forming. These are known as diverticula, and you can see them here. This is a nice, healthy looking colon, but it does have these diverticula. And this is usually, again, associated with a lower fiber diet. Most people will have a few diverticula, but when you have a lot of them, then you're more prone to this disorder called diverticulitis. So this is when material gets trapped in the diverticula, and then again, bacteria will start to grow. This can lead to inflammation, pain, and if it ruptures, it can spill out into the abdominal cavity, and that would be a sepsis problem. And that could lead to, again, death. Another disorder is known as constipation. Constipation is the inability to defecate, oftentimes associated with low fiber. Have you noticed this theme? We want to have fiber in our diet for a healthy digestive system. Dehydration and lack of exercise can actually lead to constipation. So moving is going to help you in pooping. The opposite of constipation is diarrhea. So this occurs when you're not absorbing all the water. Oftentimes this is associated with, so this can be associated with an infection that occurs if you have a viral or bacterial infection of the gastrointestinal tract, but it can also occur if you are very stressed. So it can occur for a lot of reasons, but diarrhea then leads to a very liquidy poop. And so controlling diarrhea, oftentimes we're going to still drink water, but we're going to take some type of an anti-diarrheal or fiber agent that will help to thicken the material coming out. I'm going to stop here, and then we're going to have a really short last video, okay? Talk to you later. Bye.